Henry Hudson. John Cabot was not the only person who wanted to find a northwest passage to the Indies. English explorer Henry Hudson had the same goal. Very little is known about Henry Hudson's early life, but we do know he had an interest in exploring Arctic geography. Hudson made his first attempt to find the Northwest Passage in 1607, more than 100 years after Cabot made his voyages. Hudson's idea about how he might get to the Indies was similar to Cabot's. Hudson's idea was to sail north, right over the North Pole. He knew the polar region was cold and icy, but he also knew that the sun never set during the summer months. He thought the summer sun might melt a lot of the ice, making it possible to sail over the top of the earth and come out on the other side of the world in Asia. In May of 1607, Hudson embarked from England with a single ship called the Hopewell. 6 weeks later, his men sighted the eastern coast of Greenland. Hudson sailed along the eastern coast of Greenland and then turned and sailed northeast because there was so much ice. During their voyage, he and his men saw many unfamiliar creatures, including whales, seals, and walruses. Portrait of Henry Hudson and map showing his sailing idea. Hudson's boat stuck in pack ice. In mid-July, they reached the Spitsbergen Archipelago, which is a chain of islands that has an Arctic climate. When Hudson tried to navigate this region, it was surrounded by pack ice, or frozen seawater. On May 16th, Hudson's ship almost got stuck in the ice. For a while, it was touch and go. A few days later, Hudson decided he could not reach the North Pole because of all the ice. He turned around and sailed back to England. In 1608, Hudson made a second attempt to reach the East Indies by sailing the Hopewell across the North Pole. He sailed north of Scandinavia and Russia. He sailed more than 2,500 miles, making it to the islands off the coast of Russia, known as Novaya Zemlya. But again, there was so much ice in the water that he had to turn back. In 1609, Hudson made a third attempt to find the Northwest Passage. This time he sailed for the Dutch under the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company was a trading company that formed to protect their trade in the East Indies. The company hired Hudson and told him to follow a similar route he had attempted on his previous voyage, sailing north of Scandinavia and Russia. The hope was that he would be able to sail over the top of the earth and land in Asia. Hudson left Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in April of 1609 on board the Dutch ship the Half Moon. As he made his way north, he saw more and more ice. Eventually, there was so much ice that Hudson decided to give up and turn around in mid-May. Instead of sailing back to Amsterdam as he had been told to do, Hudson decided to sail west. Hudson sailed across the Atlantic and sighted Newfoundland on July 12th. He sailed along the coast of North America, exploring much of what is now the east coast of the United States. He and his men sailed as far south as Virginia, where the Jamestown settlement had recently been established. Then they turned north. Map showing Hudson's 3 voyages. Hudson sailing upriver. On September 3rd, they came upon a large river that emptied into the Atlantic. Hudson and his men explored the river, sailing upstream. When Hudson saw the river widening out, he thought the river he was exploring might be the Northwest Passage that he and explorers before him had been seeking for years. Farther upstream, the river narrowed, and Hudson began to think maybe it would not lead him through the continent. Nevertheless, it was an interesting discovery. Hudson claimed the area for the Netherlands and the Dutch. Hudson eating with Native Americans. Hudson and his crew encountered many Native Americans of the Algonquin-speaking tribes on their trip up the river. Some Native Americans tried to attack them, but others visited the ship to trade. The Indians offered furs to Hudson in trade, and this started the fur trade along the Hudson River. One group invited Hudson to dinner. Later, Hudson described what he had experienced in his journal. I sailed to the shore in one of their canoes with an old man who was the chief of a tribe consisting of 40 men and 17 women. These I saw there in a house well constructed of oak bark and circular in shape, so that it had the appearance of being built with an arched roof. It contained a great quantity of maize, or Indian corn, and beans of the last year's growth, and there lay near the house for the purpose of drying enough to load 3 ships, besides what was growing in the fields. On our coming into the house, 2 mats were spread out to sit upon, and some food was immediately served in well-made red wooden bowls. 2 men brought in a pair of pigeons which they had shot. They supposed that I would remain with them for the night, but I returned after a short time on board the ship. The land is the finest for cultivation that I ever in my life set foot upon, and it also abounds in trees of every description. These natives are a very good people, for when they saw that I would not remain, they supposed that I was afraid of their bows, and, taking their arrows, they broke them in pieces and threw them into the fire. In late September, Hudson decided to sail back to Europe. He himself wanted to stay in the New World for the winter, but his men were tired of exploring and were threatening to mutiny. The river Hudson discovered on his 3rd voyage was later named after him. Even today, it is known as the Hudson River. Other Dutchmen came to this part of the world after Hudson. They built a city at the mouth of the Hudson River on an island the Indians called Mannahatta. The Dutch called this city New Amsterdam. Later, its name was changed to New York. Today, Manhattan is the name of one of the parts of New York City, and New York City is the most populous city in the United States. In 1610, Hudson set off on a 4th voyage. This time he was sponsored by 2 English companies, the Virginia Company and the British East India Company. Similar to the Dutch East India Company, these companies were also trading companies. Hudson's goal was the same, to find a Northwest Passage, a water route that would lead through the American continent and allow ships to sail to Asia. Hudson River today. Map of 4th voyage. Hudson sailed west, but he stayed far to the north. He reached Greenland in early June. A few weeks later, he and his men found a large strait that led into the center of North America. Hudson hoped it might lead all the way through to Asia. On August the 2nd, Hudson sailed out of the strait and into a large bay. Today, this bay is known as the Hudson Bay, and the strait is known as the Hudson Strait. Hudson spent the next few months exploring the coast of the bay. In November, his ship got stuck in the ice. He and his crew had to go ashore for the winter. It was a difficult, freezing cold winter. The men were fighting with Hudson as well as with one another. Several of them fell ill with scurvy, a disease that preys on people who have not been eating a healthy, balanced diet. When spring came, Hudson wanted to explore some more. Most of the men on the ship wanted to sail back to England. A big fight broke out. In the end, the sailors mutinied. They put Hudson, his son, and some others they did not like in a small open boat and sailed away. Henry Hudson, the great explorer, was never heard from again. Hudson abandoned by his crew.